Every other transmission in the ash reach was dead noise, static from old stars, the low hum of the boundary beacons, the occasional pulse from a cord ship Vendar as it swept the perimeter. Orin had been listening to those signals for weeks, not because anyone asked him to, but because silence made him restless and headphones made the long nights bearable. He was 14. He lived on the research vessel RVS Callaway because his aunt did, and his aunt was the only family he had left. Dr. Nella Foss ran the ship's xenolinguistics lab, the study of alien language, alien sound, alien meaning. Orin had grown up in that lab. He knew how to read a waveform the way other kids read comic books. That night, something in the beacon feed was wrong. Not broken wrong, different wrong. He pulled it up on the secondary screen and stared. The signal was buried under the standard boundary broadcast, tucked inside a frequency band that the Compact's monitoring software automatically ignored because it was classified as residual electromagnetic decay. Old radiation from a dead system, not worth scanning. Except it was repeating. Not randomly, not in a noise pattern. It was cycling with a consistent internal rhythm, like a sentence read aloud over and over by someone who had nothing left to do but repeat it. Orin spent 3 nights on it. He used his aunt's archived linguistic models without asking her, which she would have called theft, and he called borrowing. He ran the pattern against 40 different proto-linguistic structures on record. On the 3rd night, at a little past 2 in the ship's morning cycle, the model spat out a match. The signal was language, very old language, dragon language. And it said, "Does anyone still ask why?" Orin sat back and looked at that translation for a long time. He had read the Compact's official records on Draveth. Every child who lived near the Ash Reach eventually did. The last ancient dragon, a monster the size of a mountain. 400 years ago, he had destroyed 3 diplomatic ships without warning, killing 400 people, and the Compact had sealed him on the prison world Rekath and agreed never to go near him again. The sealing accord had held ever since. No ship went in, no signal was sent. Draveth was simply left there, alone, in a dead system at the edge of known space. Except he was not simply sitting there. He was asking a question, the same question over and over for who knew how many years. Orin went to his aunt's quarters and woke her up. He showed her the translation on his tablet. She looked at it, then she looked at him, then she sat down very slowly on the edge of her bunk and rubbed her face with both hands. "Delete it," she said. "Aunt Nella's." "Delete the file, Orin. Close the program. Do not open that frequency again. He's asking a question. That's not what monsters do. He killed 400 people. The records say he did, but the records also say nobody ever asked him why." She stood up and took the tablet out of his hands. She held it for a moment, looking at the words on the screen. Then she handed it back to him. "Go to sleep. We are not talking about this again." Orin went back to his cabin. He did not delete the file. Instead, he sat at his small desk for a long time, thinking. He thought about what it would feel like to say something and have no one hear it. To ask something and have no one answer. To do that not for a week or a year, but for 400 years, in the dark, in a dead system, with no company except the frozen rock and the distant stars. He thought about how long 400 years was. He thought about the signal, "Does anyone still ask why?" And what kind of creature kept broadcasting that question after 4 centuries of silence. Not a mindless one. Not an evil one. One that still hoped. He pulled up the Callaway's internal systems on his screen, quietly, carefully, the way someone moves when they have already made a decision and do not want to think about it too hard. He located the auxiliary pod bay. 1 scout pod, single seat, rated for short-range jumps and atmospheric entry. Small enough to fly in the maintenance window when the crew was occupied with the weekly system audit. Small enough that no one would notice it was gone until it was already too late. He started writing a message to his aunt, not an apology. He had nothing to apologize for. He wrote it as a reason, a clear, careful, honest reason. He told her what he was going to do, and he told her why. He set it to send the moment the pod launched. Then he began to prepare. Outside the porthole above his desk, the ash reach stretched in every direction, a vast quiet dark, full of dead light from distant things. Somewhere in the middle of it, on a tidally locked rock, with one side burning and one side frozen, an ancient creature was still sending the same words into the void. Orin looked out at that dark for a long moment. Then he got to work. The pod was smaller than a cargo crate. It smelled like dust and old rubber seals and the faint chemical bite of emergency oxygen packs. Orin fit into the pilot seat the way a person fits into something not designed for them, with effort, with adjustment, with a stubborn refusal to admit it was uncomfortable. He had 4 hours before the maintenance window closed. He used the first 20 minutes double-checking the jump coordinates he had quietly pulled from the navigation system the night before. Rekath, the prison world. The pod's computer flagged the destination immediately with a red warning border and a text box that said restricted zone, ceiling, accord violation, confirm override. He confirmed the override. The computer asked him twice more. He confirmed it twice more. The pod detached from the Callaway's underside with a soft clunk, drifting out into the dark without any engine burn. He waited until he was 300 meters clear before he lit the thrusters, low and quiet, angled away from the ship's sensor array. He had timed it. The array was running a calibration cycle. There was a 12-minute blind window. He sent the message to his aunt. Then he jumped. The jump lasted 4 seconds. Coming out of it felt like being turned inside out and then put back correctly, which was how every short jump felt and which Orin had never fully gotten used to. The stars around him rearranged themselves. The dead system of the ash reach opened up ahead of him, and there, in the middle of it, was Rekath. It was an ugly planet, brown-gray, scarred with old impact craters, wrapped in a thin, dirty atmosphere that looked like it could barely decide whether to exist. The day side glowed a dull orange from the permanent sun exposure. The night side was a deep shadow that looked cold enough to hurt. Between them, a thin band of half-light ran around the planet's equator like a scar. Behind him, every alarm on the Callaway would be going off right now. He started transmitting. He had written the message in the proto-linguistic structure of the signal using his aunt's models. He was not fluent, he was barely functional, but he had the phrase right. He sent it on the same frequency band Draveth used, over and over, as the pod descended toward the atmosphere. I heard your question, I want to answer it. The temperature sensors on the pod's hull spiked. Not from atmospheric entry. The pod had not yet touched the upper atmosphere. Something below was generating heat on a scale that made the instrument panel light up like a warning board. Then Draveth rose. He came up through the transition band like a continent deciding to stand. Orin's forward camera feed showed him as a shape first, an enormous moving darkness against the orange glow of the day side. Then, as he climbed higher and the camera adjusted, the details resolved. Wings that blocked out the middle band of the sky. A body like a mountain range in motion, the surface of it shifting between deep black rock and glowing orange-white at the joints, like something that had cooled on the outside but was still burning within. Crystal bone jutted from the spine in long, pale ridges, catching the distant sunlight in a way that made them look almost luminous. His head was broad and angular, built like something structural rather than something alive, and his eyes were the color of stars that were running out of fuel, dim white with deep orange centers. He looked at the pod the way a person looks at a very small insect they are not yet sure whether to bother with. His voice came through not as sound, but as vibration. The hull of the pod resonated with it. The words arrived in Orin's chest before they arrived in his ears. You are a human, you are small, you are not afraid. Orin checked. His hands were trembling. His stomach felt like it was trying to exit his body through his spine. He pressed the transmit button. I'm a little afraid, he said, but I came anyway. There was a long silence. The wings held position in the upper atmosphere, vast and still. The eyes did not move. Then Draveth descended, slowly, without urgency, without threat. He simply went back down, the way a tide pulls back from a shore. By the time Orin's pod hit the upper atmosphere and began to shake with entry friction, the dragon was already back on the surface, settled into the transition band, watching the sky. The pod landed badly. One of the struts hit a rock at an angle, and the whole thing tilted 3 degrees to the left. Orin sat inside it for a moment, breathing. Then he unlatched the door and stepped out onto Rekath. The air was thin and cold and tasted like nothing. The ground was black basalt, cracked in long lines, dusted with pale ash that had no obvious source. The transition band stretched in both directions along the horizon, a thin strip of grey light between burning and frozen. Draveth was watching him from 40 meters away. Up close, the scale of the creature was something that the brain simply refused to process correctly. Orin's mind kept trying to categorize what it was seeing as landscape rather than as a living thing. The dragon's head alone was larger than the Callaway. Orin stood on the rock and looked up at those dying star eyes. He had made it. He had no idea what came next, but he had made it. It started slowly, the way cold water starts to warm, so gradually you almost miss the moment it changes. Draveth did not speak first. Orin did. He sat down cross-legged on the basalt, which seemed to confuse the dragon more than anything else had so far. A being that expected threat or retreat apparently had no ready response to a small human sitting down in the ash like he was settling in for a long talk. "I'm Orin," he said. "I live on a science ship. My aunt is going to be very angry with me." The translation module in his earpiece worked slowly, pushing his words through the proto-linguistic converter. It was approximate at best, but Draveth's head tilted just slightly. The movement displaced enough air to push a ripple of warm wind across Orin's face. Then the ground vibrated, low, rhythmic, words built from deep frequency rather than air. "Why did you come, small thing?" "Not a question, a test." "Because you were asking one," Orin said. 400 years is a long time to ask something and get no answer." Another long silence. The pale ridges of crystal bone along Draveth's spine caught the grey light of the transition band and held it. The dragon's eyes moved, not his head, just the eyes, tracking Orin the way something ancient tracks something that does not fit the pattern it expects. What followed was hours of careful, imperfect, halting exchange. Draveth communicated partly in the proto-language, partly in projected sensation, heat pulses that carried feeling the way that words carry meaning. Grief was a slow cooling. Anger was a sudden spike of temperature that made the air above Orin's head shimmer. Patience, and the dragon had enormous patience, was a deep, even warmth, like standing near something that has been burning for centuries and has no intention of going out. Orin learned to read it. He did not know how, he simply did. The truth came out in pieces, the way buried things come out when water moves over them long enough. The last delegation, 400 years ago, had not come to talk. They had come with a weapon, a crystalline resonance device designed to vibrate at the precise frequency of ancient dragon bone structure, shattering it from the inside. It had been built into the casing of a diplomatic gift, a data archive offered as a gesture of cultural exchange. The delegation had presented it with their hands open and their words peaceful. Draveth had sensed it the moment it crossed his threshold. Ancient dragons felt vibration in ways that no other species did. He felt the device inside the casing the same way a person feels a blade hidden under cloth. He had 1 second to act. He acted. He had tried to tell them afterward. He had broadcast the explanation on every frequency he could reach, but the compact had already labeled it a massacre. No one came close enough to listen. The cruisers that arrived came with weapons armed, not with receivers open. The sealing accord was drafted within a year, and then there was nothing. Silence, 4 centuries of silence. Does anyone still ask why? Orin sat with all of that for a long time without saying anything. Draveth's heat language during the telling had been cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the cold of something that has carried a thing alone for too long. "That was wrong," Orin said finally. "What they tried to do to you was wrong. And what happened after leaving you here, not listening, that was wrong too. I'm sorry no one came sooner." The dragon was still, completely, absolutely still. The kind of still that feels like the whole world holding its breath. "Then you are a strange species." Orin almost smiled. "We get that a lot." The warmth that came after was not dramatic. It did not arrive like a sunrise or a revelation. It arrived the way trust always arrives between two very different creatures, quietly, and only after both of them have been honest about something that cost them something to say. Draveth lowered his head. Not toward the ground in the way a defeated thing lowers its head. Toward Orin specifically. The enormous angular skull descended until the nearest crystal ridge was level with Orin's eye line, close enough that he could see his own reflection in the pale bone. The dragon held the position for 3 full seconds. Then he raised his head again and looked out at the horizon. Orin's earpiece crackled. His aunt's voice broke through on the emergency channel, tight and frightened and furious all at once. He did not answer her yet. He sat in the ash on the prison world, next to the last ancient dragon in existence, and for a moment he simply let the silence be good. While Orin sat in the ash, the galaxy was losing its mind. Accord ship Vendar had filed its emergency report within 20 minutes of Orin's pod disappearing from the Callaway's Bay. Captain Arev's report was precise, factual, and damning. One human juvenile, age 14, had stolen a vessel and crossed the sealing Accord boundary in direct violation of compact law. He was currently on the surface of Rekath, alive, in proximity to Draveth. The Compact Council convened an emergency session. It took less than 3 hours. 17 species moved to sanction humanity. 3 called for a military extraction. 2 called for revoking humanity's compact membership entirely. The debate was loud, and it was fast, and it was built almost entirely on fear. The specific fear of people who had spent 4 centuries telling themselves that the worst thing in the known galaxy was safely locked away, and who had just discovered that a 14-year-old human had walked up to it and sat down. Director House, humanity's senior ambassador to the Compact, stood up in the chamber when the military extraction motion hit the floor. She was 63 years old. She had spent 40 years in diplomatic service. She had the kind of stillness that came from having been in very bad rooms before and knowing exactly how much words cost. She said, if any compact vessel fires on that planet while a human child is conducting a peaceful conversation on its surface, humanity will withdraw from the Compact before the smoke clears. We will take our 17 active trade corridors with us. You can vote on that if you like. The chamber went quiet. The extraction motion failed. The military ships held position at the system edge. On the Callaway, Nella Foss was in communications lockdown. The Accord cruiser had restricted all outgoing signals from the research vessel pending investigation. She sat in her lab and stared at Orin's message on her screen for the 100th time. He had written it so carefully, so calmly, no apology, just reasons. He had written, if he were truly evil, he would not be asking questions. She put her hands flat on the desk and breathed. One of the junior crew got a message through the lockdown on a secondary channel, a technical loophole that would be closed within the hour. Nella used the 60 seconds. She had to send 4 words to Orin's podcom. Finish it, do it right. Back on Rekath, Orin received the message. He read it twice, then he turned to Draveth. I need to ask you something harder, he said. The dragon waited. Not what happened, what do you want? Not revenge, not an apology, what do you actually want now? The heat language that came back was layered in a way Orin was still learning to read. There was something old in it, something that had been held a long time. When Draveth finally shaped it into words, they came slowly, with the weight of something that has been true for a very long time, but never spoken. He did not want revenge. He was done with anger. It had burned in him for a century and then simply run out of fuel, the way fires do. He did not want freedom in the way the Compact understood it, because there was nowhere left for him to go. His species was gone. The worlds they had known were gone. What he wanted was record. He wanted the truth of what had happened 400 years ago written into compact history formally, officially, not as a footnote but as a fact. He wanted the history of the ancient dragons preserved, their language, their knowledge, the way they understood the universe before he was gone. He was the last. He had perhaps a century left, maybe less. When he died, everything they had known and built and thought across thousands of years died with him. Unless someone wrote it down. I will make them listen, Oren said. He had no authority. He was 14 and grounded on an alien rock. He said it anyway, the way some promises are made, not because you have the power to keep them, but because someone needs to hear them said. Draveth looked at him with those dying star eyes for a long time. Then the vibration came, low and slow, and something that felt, in the heat language, like the first warm thing in a very cold season. He believed the boy. The observer drone entered the system on the 31st hour. It was unarmed. The Compact Council had authorized it as a compromise. The species that wanted military action got movement. The species that wanted restraint got the weapon left out. The drone was small, round, covered in sensor arrays, and capable of transmitting live to the council chamber. Oren had asked for it. He had sent the request through his pod com with a message that was brief and calm. Send a drone, unarmed, let it land. It is time for people to hear this. He stood in the transition band and watched it descend. Then he turned to Draveth. You do not have to talk to them, he said. You talk to me, I will pass it on, same as before. The dragon looked at the drone for a long moment. Then he looked at Oren. Then he settled back into the depression in the rock where his weight had worn the basalt smooth over 4 centuries, and he began. In the Compact Council chamber, 300 representatives of 300 species watched the feed in silence. Most of them had never seen Draveth, except in historical footage from the massacre, blurred, distant, shot from a retreating vessel. Now he was simply there on their screens, enormous and still, speaking to a human boy who sat cross-legged in the ash and listened. Oren relayed everything carefully. He did not dramatize, he did not editorialize. He just passed the words on, precisely the way his aunt had always told him translation worked best. Not your words, not your feeling, theirs. Then Draveth did something no one expected. He reached into the space beneath his left foreleg, a slow, deliberate movement, and drew out a fragment of crystal. It was roughly the size of a shuttlecraft. Its structure was strange, asymmetrical, clearly not natural. He placed it on the basalt in front of the drone and held it there. The fragment was a piece of the weapon, embedded in his bone at the moment of detonation, carried inside him for 400 years. He had pulled it out himself, over decades, piece by piece. This was the last large fragment. The feed from the drone's analysis sensors hit the council chamber 12 seconds later. The fragment matched a weapons design signature. An arms manufacturer called Drelvos Consolidated, banned by the Compact 80 years ago for exactly this category of technology, resonance weaponry, designed to target specific species biology. The match was not approximate, it was complete. Someone had built that weapon. Someone had authorized it for a diplomatic delegation. Someone had buried the records and called it a massacre. The council chamber did not erupt into noise. It went very quiet, which was worse. The quiet of people absorbing something they cannot immediately find a way to argue with. A Sorathi counselor asked Oren directly, "Why did you come here, human child?" Oren looked at the camera on the drone. He had not prepared an answer. He gave the honest one. Because he asked a question and nobody answered. I thought someone should. In his cruiser at the system edge, Captain Arev had been listening to the entire 31 hours. He opened his official log and typed one line. The human child demonstrated greater diplomatic protocol than any official delegation in 400 years. He saved the entry, leaned back in his chair, and looked at the feed for a while longer. The council voted 4 hours after the fragment's analysis results were confirmed. The sealing accord was suspended pending full investigation. Draveth was no longer, under compact law, a prisoner. He did not move. He stayed in the depression in the basalt, in the thin grey light of the transition band. This was his world now. He had worn it into the shape of himself. He had nowhere else he wanted to be. But for the first time in 400 years, the word prisoner did not apply. 3 weeks later, Orin stood in front of a review board on the Callaway. 3 human officers, 1 compact observer. He had violated the sealing accord, commandeered ship property, ignored a direct order from his legal guardian, and entered a restricted zone. The charges were read clearly and without drama. Orin stood with his hands at his sides and listened to all of them. The compact observer cast the first vote, commendation. The 3 human officers conferred for 4 minutes. Then they gave him 30 days confined to quarters, revoked his access to the ship's auxiliary pod bay for the remainder of the posting, and required him to write a 5,000-word report on compact law regarding restricted zones. It was, by any measure, extremely lenient. Before any of that happened, his aunt had walked into the holding room and hugged him for a long time without saying a word. When she finally let go, her eyes were wet. She looked at him the way people look at things they almost lost. "You could have died," she said. "I know. You knew before you went." "Yes." She looked at him for another long moment. Then she nodded once and did not bring it up again. The compact established a new formal agreement, the Dragon Accord. A small research team, xenolinguists, historians, 1 cultural liaison, was authorized for regular visits to Rekath to document the history of the ancient dragons. Nella was offered the liaison position. She accepted before the offer was fully finished. The political consequences were slow but real. No species publicly declared that their position had changed, but committees that had quietly blocked human representation on certain councils began experiencing strange delays in their internal scheduling. Trade negotiations that had stalled for years moved forward. Invitations appeared for human delegates to sit at tables they had previously been refused. The compact did not announce any of it. It simply happened, the way things happen when a fact becomes impossible to argue with. Humanity's strange, reckless, excessive habit of caring too much about things that were not their problem turned out to be very difficult to keep dismissing after a 14-year-old had demonstrated it in front of 300 species. The last thing that happened was not political. 2 days before the Callaway left its posting, Orin took a supply shuttle to Rekath for 1 final visit. Not official, not documented, just him and the grey light of the transition band, and Draveth settled in the worn basalt hollow. Draveth had given him a title. In the dragon proto-language, it translated as the one who landed. It was the highest form of recognition an ancient dragon could give another being. It meant you came when others would not. You stayed when it was easier to leave. You treated me as something worth arriving for. It had not been given in over 1,000 years. They did not talk about the accord or the council or the investigation. Orin sat on a flat piece of basalt with his jacket pulled close against the cold and talked about Earth instead. The way seasons changed color, the noise oceans made at night, the specific feeling of rain on a face, cold, random, arriving from above with no warning and no intent. Draveth had never heard rain described before. He went still in the way he went still when something reached him. Then slowly, he projected an image, not heat language, but something more direct, a thing shared between minds the way very old beings sometimes could. A memory, water on a world he had known before any living species now in the compact had existed. Blue water, under a yellow sun, falling from clouds that no longer existed over a continent that had burned long before Orin's species had learned to walk upright. Orin sat with that image for a long time. The compact had feared the last ancient dragon for 4 centuries. They had built an accord around that fear and called it law, and the law had held, and the fear had held, and on a frozen rock at the edge of known space, an ancient creature had asked the same question into the void for 400 years and received nothing back but silence. It took a human boy 14 years old to ask the obvious question. What if he was just waiting for someone kind enough to land?